Welcome, welcome. Well, folks, Steve Cohen came up pretty clutch this offseason. How is the man, Steve Cohen, feeling right now? And are the New York Mets and the San Diego Padres a perfect match for a big trade? Well, folks, it is the beginning of spring training, and there is a bunch of hope all over the MLB camps. But there is no more hope than in Port St. Lucie, where we have the New York Mets, that $330 million ball club with a bunch of shiny new toys. And folks, doesn't it feel good? You know, you see the highlights, you hear Carlos Mendoza speaking, see guys coming into camp, Clay Holmes, Francisco Alvarez, Luis Angel Acuna, conversations about him. I mean, things really feel good. It really does. I got to tell you, I'm just super, super excited. Obviously, we signed Pete Alonso last week. Juan Soto in the beginning of the offseason. And you know what? The season is coming up quickly. We have in 9 days the first spring training game in a little over a month, about 5 weeks. You have the MLB season starting, so it is super super exciting. I cannot wait for it to come. And you know what, folks? I'm pretty sure you feel the same way. But before we get started, as always, smash that like button. If you're an MLB fan, Mets fan, subscribe. We would love you to join the channel. You are all welcome. We just love to have fun here. Okay, folks, let's get into how Mr. Cohen is feeling. And Mr. Cohen honestly put his money where his mouth is. For all of you who have missed the final tally, Mr. Cohen has spent a little over $1 billion this offseason. I repeat, $1 billion he invested in this offseason. And I feel firmly 2025, we are going all in. 2024 was a bit of a development year, came 2 games shy of the World Series. This is the year we have the Polar Bear guaranteed around for another year. Juan Soto, this is the beginning of hopefully a magical, mythical tenure. Juan Soto being here for 15 years possibly. So a lot of good things to come with that. You have Lindor right in the middle of his prime. I think we have something very special here and now. So, we're going to get into a little bit of the trade conversation momentarily, but, people have been speculating. People have been asking, are the Mets a frontline starter away from being, a World Series favorite? Or maybe they'll never be that World Series favorite because of how stacked the Dodgers are, but they will certainly be much more competitive. But then, again, that leads you to the question, will the Mets make a trade before the so-called deadline? And you know what? Again, we're going to get into details, but I think it all comes to matching. You have to have the right trade partner. It's not all about, oh, I need a starter, I want a starter, I have the prospect. You need to have the right matches, and that's where I think a team like the Padres really sticks out, and we're going to get into that. All right, but we're going to start off with Steve Cohen, and what is his verdict on the Mets after these Juan Soto, Pete Alonso signing, because this is a mega free this and I've said it as soon as the Mets signed Juan Soto, the best player in the offseason. I mean, we got to see how Roki Sasaki turns out, but Juan Soto more than likely will be the hands down best. I said right after that signing, it's at least around a B offseason. Obviously, we needed pitching. We got Sean Manaea. That was huge. Brought him back. Clay Holmes, I think there's a lot of upside there. Frankie Montas, some upside there as well. AJ Minter, a top bullpen target. But Pete Alonso, that was the icing on the cake. And, I got to say, we've had some good debates about how significantly the lineup has improved from last year. And I gotta say, I spoke to Richard. He's a good member on the channel. Great job helping out the channel, and I thank you so much for that, Richard. You know it. You made some great points about the lineup being a little different, and that Juan Soto was the major difference from last year. But I gotta say, I think there's going to be a lot of upgrades on the lineup. Juan Soto, yes, he's a legitimate standout option, but you got to figure, and I've said this in many answers. Pete Alonso, you got to figure he's going to have a better season. He has to have a better season. Francisco Alvarez, I'm telling you, he is the key to so much success here. He's got to have a better season. He had a very down season. Mark Vientos missed more than a month. You know that, folks? He missed more than a month of action. You're going to have him for a full season now. I expect more production because he's going to play a full season, but I also expect growth from him. Lindor, as good as he was last year, he didn't take off until June when he was in the leadoff position. He will be in the leadoff position the entire year. I expect an uptick in production, but I especially expect that uptick because he will be protected by Mr. Juan Soto in the lineup. Possibly he will have one of the best protectors in all of Major League Baseball. So very exciting things. And then to boot, you have your young prospects. You're always going to be looking for this year's Mark Vientos. Last year, Mark Vientos was that young prospect. Who's going to be the breakout prospect this year? Could it be a Luis Angel Acuna? Could it be a Ronnie Mauricio? And the potential at the back of and end of our lineup is just so great. So great. So I'm super excited about that. So again, you got extra potential there. And then if you go to the center field position, last year you had Harrison Bader and you had Tyrone Taylor. Tyrone Taylor is going to have a very similar role, but I think adding in Jose Siri helps out tremendously because he has more pop, a lot more pop than Harrison Bader. So if you look at the lineup, although you did add just to Juan Soto, I think that the lineup looks so much better. So much better, in my opinion. You got Marte coming off the bench, McNeil coming off the bench if you choose to go with one of the youngsters. You got Winker, a guy who brings up so much energy and passion, that dynamic, that attitude. Folks, this is not going to be the Mets from 10, 20 years ago. This is a team that has attitude, that has grit. I mean, Juan Soto is a guy who's afraid of no one. There was a comment on the board yesterday saying, I didn't like the way Francisco Alvarez put a target on the Mets' back. He said, hey, you know what? I feel confident we have the best lineup. So you could look at it from two different sides. You could look at like, oh, people might not like that around the league, but who the hell cares? The Mets at this point have to be fearless, afraid of no one. Now, I know Carlos Mendoza took it as a different, he said, hey, everybody has a good lineup. A lot of teams have a good lineup. But that's how managers going to answer. Players are a bit different. So how does Steve Cohen feel? How does Steve Cohen feel after what he did? So, obviously, again, to allude to the fact, the organization managed to steal Juan Soto away from the New York Yankees, signing the slugger to a 15-year, $765 million deal. On top of that, Steve Cohen also brought back the polar bear on that 2-year contract, giving us a daunting power duo in the heart of the lineup. Now, what is Steve Cohen saying to these pivotal moves? Obviously, he is feeling pretty good, but here's his quote. Cohen says, we've got a pretty good looking team. Honestly, that's an understatement. The Mets had a terrible half in the beginning of 2024, but things really turned around at the All-Star break, making the playoffs and nearly beating the Dodgers in the NLCS. New York showed serious guts to flip a switch in the summer, and it nearly resulted in a World Series appearance. The Mets also managed to get better on the mound in the last couple months. I'm going to mention again Clay Holmes, Sean Manaea, Cohen. He spoke on reuniting with Alonso, and this is what Cohen says. He goes, if he performs well, good for him. I mean, how fantastic is that? He just has to be Pete. Go do his thing. Hopefully, he's more relaxed. Not saying he wasn't relaxed, but hopefully he can go focus on what he does, which is baseball, and enjoy the season with his teammates. Let's go win something. Let's go win something. I mean, that is so telling. That is exactly what Steve Cohen says, and I find it very amazing. He basically alluded to the fact that Pete last year had a lot of things going on, and he says all the guys got to do is relax. And I think that's really what kind of helped him out in the playoffs. At that point, although it was a pressure-packed situation in the playoffs, Pete Alonso's like, you know what? I'm days away from free agency. Season wasn't the greatest. Right now, if I have a bad postseason, it would kind of be expected. I think in his mind, he just cleared it out. What do I have to lose? Let's just relax, use the whole field, be a bit more patient, and everything seemed to work right for Pete. I'm gonna repeat this: that Pete Alonso, if he uses the entire field, he is one of the most gifted power hitters in all of baseball. When he was a rookie, that is how he excelled, hitting balls to center field and right field routinely, not trying to pull. He wasn't trying to pull off the ball like he was most of last year, which is why the slider was one of the deadliest pitches to Mr. Pete Alonso, which is why he left so many runners on base, because that is what they threw him in those particular situations. All right, so you have everybody right now in the beginning of camp. It's all rainbows and sunshine. Everybody's excited. But, again, you have across the country, the LA Dodgers, they are the defending champions. How are we going to top them? Well, yesterday I did a comparison and I had a little trouble with my video. Some of you may know about that. Some of you may not. But you know what? I had a little trouble. But what I did in that video is I did a little mock experiment. What's the biggest difference between the Dodgers lineup and the Mets lineup? Well, the Dodgers have significant talent. We all know that. Superstars, MVPs galore in the beginning of the lineup. But what is the difference? The difference is that lineup is older, much older to be exact. The Mets average age, if you and I included the young kids at second base only because I think they're going to play their majority of the year. So if you compare the Dodgers average age in their lineup, it is 31.1. The Mets are 27.7, almost 4 years younger. The Mets at the end of their lineup, in my opinion, it starts with Alvarez. It really does. But they have so much damn potential. God forbid a Mauricio and Acuna breaks out. It's going to be so special. It is going to be so special, and I am so excited for that. The Dodgers have a bit, of question marks at the end of the lineup. Conforto, is he going to be healthy? And even if he is healthy, how productive is he going to be? They got Hai Young Sung Kim from Japan. How productive is he going to be in the States? Tommy Edman, he's been pretty consistent, but, I don't expect a monster year from him. Will Smith, he's a 30-year-old catcher. I tend to think those guys trend downward at this age in their career. Francisco Alvarez is 23. So I expect a lot of good things. I also mentioned, and I mentioned this over and over, scares me with Shohei Ohtani, two-way player. Double the chance for him to get injured. He's going to be pitching and he's going to be hitting now. 2 times the chance to get injured. He's 30 years old, but there's a lot of wear and tear in that body. He's been hurt in the past. Mookie Betts, he's 31 years old, going to be 31 years old. He's been hurt in the past. Freddie Freeman, he's 35 years old. He's been hurt in the past. Teo, he's been decent, but he's going to be 32. Max Muncy's going to be their 5th hitter. He's 34 or 35. He's been a guy who's played limited in the last year as well. So what I'm saying is that Dodgers lineup is extremely talented, extremely dynamic, but their age is a concern, and they've had injury history. So, the Mets, and then you look at the Mets top of the lineup, and Lindor, you give him credit for always playing. Pete, you give him credit for always playing. Soto, you give him credit. He's always been a guy who's been out there. A very limited injury history with the top end of that lineup. Even if you include Mark Vientos in there, Mark Vientos in his first year, he was very readily available. Yes, you can find some injury guys. Brandon Nemo, he's a guy. But I think with less injuries and with the youth, the Mets lineup has just as much potential to succeed, to thrash as the Dodgers lineup. Okay, folks, let's talk about those trade possibilities. And you've been hearing trade possibilities galore with the Padres. And if you haven't got a chance to like or subscribe, please help out the channel continue to grow. I cannot thank you enough. Again, if you're an MLB fan, Mets fan, you're all welcome on Dominant Mets Nation. Okay, so a lot of the things that you hear about the Padres, you hear Marte, possibly the Mets trying to dump, and I guess it depends on the slant of the article. The Mets making a Marte trade, a bigger trade that would include, maybe Dylan Cease or Michael King coming back to the Mets. Obviously, we would have to include a lot more than a Marte, but it's really interesting. It is really interesting, to say the least. Okay, so before we get to the pitching acquisition, let's look at the Starling Marte. And you can include Starling Marte in a larger trade, or you can include Starling Marte in a separate trade. So the rumors have been swirling, and they continue to swirl around Starling Marte. Marte is in the last year of a 4-year contract. And the thought process, the theory is all the Mets planning to release Starling Marte to reduce the team's financial crunch. The Mets right now, they're about, depending on where you look, they're about in the range of $324 to $330 million on the books. It is the second highest after the Dodgers. And the Mets, according to some sources, could possibly be trying to release a few prominent faces in order to reduce their financial burden. The 36-year-old center fielder may be one of them. He had that $78 million deal over 4 years, and he is due almost $21 million this offseason. Back in December, the Mets even discussed trading Marte for Hunter Harvey with the Kansas City Royals. But the discussions really kind of stalled after Juan Soto. And then the Mets really were focused on adding pitching, and they were focused on re-signing Pete Alonso. So nothing really happened. But right now a Starling Marte trade has really come back into the spotlight. So, based on an update by Pat Ragazzo on Sports Illustrated, there's a strong possibility that Starling Marte can be traded to the San Diego Padres. The Padres are looking forward to improving their fielding segment for the upcoming season. After Jurickson Profar was traded to the Braves, the Padres have a vacant spot for a Starling left fielder on their team. So Starling Marte is in his mid-30s. He is often injured. And, he's a guy right now slated to be a backup outfielder slash DH, But, he's also a guy that, really when he's been healthy, I think he's been a very good piece for the Mets. I think he's been a pretty good piece. But, again, you have to weigh the cost versus benefit, because if you could somehow shed that salary, that would be good. But the premise of this article about the Mets shedding salary, I think including a team like the Padres really makes no sense, because the Padres are a team that themselves are looking to shed salary. So, the source of this kind of article really makes no sense. But then you got to kind of weigh, all right, you know what? Let's just say the Mets aren't shedding salary. What would they be getting in return? And the return that a lot of people have rumored is Wandy Peralta. Wandy Peralta is going to be 33 years old. He is a lefty. When he was with the Yankees a few years back, he was quite good. I remember that. Last year, Wandy Peralta was 3-2 with a 4 ERA. He pitched 38 innings, a 1.2 WHIP, 5.2 K per nine, which was pretty down, pretty down. Wandy Peralta is pretty interesting because the Mets they they are looking for an upgrade. That second lefty in the pen, they have AJ Minter, but they are looking for a second lefty. People were talking about Brooks Raley, but Brooks Raley is coming back for or he's had Tommy John, so he might not be available for the whole year. So looking to improve that lefty might be a pretty decent option, really a pretty decent option. So Peralta, his fastball, a lot of people always focus on VLL first. His fastball is around 95.1. He's got really decent stuff. He's got a changeup, a sinker, a slider, and a four seam. In fact, he's actually a guy who uses a changeup predominantly. He's got a good changeup. He uses that 44% of the time. He is the sinker, he throws 37% of the time, and slider 13, four seam fastball 5%. Wandy Peralta is mostly a ground ball pitcher. Last year, when he pitched a lot more, he was a 94% ground ball. So he induced a ground ball in the 94th percentile. That is extremely good. He's a weapon, folks. He is certainly a weapon, and I think the Mets would be wise to kind of look for a second lefty. Really wise to look for a second lefty. I think it's going to really improve the Mets kind of like chances against teams like the Phillies. They have a lot of lefties. I mean, AJ Minter, you have a situation in the sixth, seventh inning. It would be good if you can bring in a lefty that you can trust, a lefty that's not just a soft thrower. Last year, Danny Young, he was a guy. We had Alex Young last year, but those guys were more or less just kind of like soft throwers. This is the guy who could get it up there, 95, 96. He has a really good changeup, a good sinker, and he's a double play machine. So, I mean, I would like that, and I think he would provide more value than a Marte. And also, like, if Marte is going to be 35, 36, we can find a better DH option. I feel we can find a better DH option than an often injured Starling Marte. So if you could somehow pay down some of the Starling Marte contract and get a piece like Wandy Peralta back, as long as he's healthy, I think that is actually a plus move, a positive move. Okay. All right. So that's one aspect of the trade. And now the other aspect of the trade is getting a guy like Dylan Cease. And John Heyman, he had an article in the Post, I believe it was last night, about how the Mets are really one finishing piece away from being that team, that team that can really legitimately fight with the Dodgers. And that obviously means acquiring a frontline starter. Now, let me ask you this, folks. What do you think the chances are that the Mets will acquire a frontline starter? Not a guy like Blackburn, but a frontline starter before the trade deadline. I mean, out of 10, I guess 10 being the best chance, one being the worst chance. I mean, folks, I'm going to give this close to a 9 out of 10 because I think unless Kodai Senga comes back, he's dominant. Sean Manaea comes back, he's dominant. Brandon Sproat comes up, he's a phenom. Peterson comes up, he's good. McGill, unless everybody turns out to be phenomenal, I that would probably lessen the chances. But I think there's still going to be a need to upgrade the rotation, and that's why I'm going to say that this close to a 90% shot. You got a bunch of these young kids coming down the camp, Brett Beatty, Acuna, and the Mets are trying these kids out all over the infield. Brett Beatty, you're going to see him at second base. You're going to see Acuna at third. You're going to see Jet Williams in center field. You're going to see all these guys who are, traditionally have other major positions. The Mets are going to play these kids all over to show their versatility, to improve their value to the Mets and to other teams around the league. If Jet Williams can play center field and shortstop, he's shown he's a versatile kid, improves his value. Ronnie Mauricio, same thing. I think the Mets are doing it, yes, to show versatility on their team, but also, it helps raise their value as well. I was thinking another guy like, let's say Tyler McGill. And another surprise from Carlos Mendoza's opening day press conference is they asked him in spring training yesterday, is Tyler McGill going to come out of the pen? And, you would think possibly because the Mets have a 5-man rotation plus Griffin Canning plus Blackburn, McGill could possibly be the 8th guy. So it would make sense to possibly make him a long man. No, they said he's going to be a starter. He's going to go out as a starter. And I think that's a wise thing. Wise thing, folks, because look at it this way. If McGill, let's say, has a dominant, and I think McGill's going to get some run, because if he has a good April and May, that is a guy who has almost 3 years left on his contract. So, he has 3 years left now. If he pitches April, May, he'll have 2.5 years left. His value will be there. That is possibly a chip. Now, if you're Dylan Cease, if you're the Padres or Michael King, he's going to be gone at the end of the year. You trade for Tyler McGill, okay, you got 2.5 years of services as opposed to a half a year services. So that could be a really good piece there. And then now you build a package around McGill. If Brett Beatty could show some value in the first month or two, I believe that the Mets really are playing chess here. Yes, they can throw out a package, Jet Williams, Drew Gilbert, Brandon Sproat. Here you go, Padres. Good day, goodbye, let's go. But it really wouldn't make sense. You want to maximize. I think the best teams, what they do is they maximize their prospects, maximize the return. They put their prospects in the best light. And this is what the Yankees used to do 10 years ago. The Yankees used to make it seem like their prospects were the God's gift. And they would give up, like I remember them saying, oh, our 20th prospect is just as good as another team's top 5 prospect. But I think that the Yankees were very good at upselling their talent. The Mets, I wouldn't say so. Although, the Mets have been pretty decent. Some trades haven't been that bad. As it turns out, initially a lot of these trades looked a lot worse. The Javier Baez trade, you traded Pete Crow Armstrong. He hasn't really come onto the scene. But again, you want to maximize your prospect. If he's a top 5 prospect in your organization at the time, you want to get a little better return than a guy with 2 months on his contract left. So that wasn't a good trade. You go back to the Edwin Diaz trade when we traded Jared Kelenic. And, although, we took on Robbie Cano. That's a very complex trade. And at the end of the day, the best player in the trade turned out to be Edwin Diaz. But who knows? Maybe if you traded, you could have got a better return than Diaz, but it's tough. That one, I think, a lot of evaluators that gave that trade an F really have to go back, because right now, it wouldn't get in the A range because we had to pay down Robbie Cano's contract, and that was a bit of an albatross. But I think, you can give Brody Van Wagenen, you can give him a grade of a B. Definitely for that trade. You definitely can now. He definitely deserves a B. So it went from an F to a B. Not bad. Not bad at all. So trades have a way of really, changing over time. But the Mets, despite that, regardless, have to maximize their prospect value. Jet Williams, if you're going to use a top 2 chip in your farm system, you better be getting some impact player that has more than a year left. That's more than a rental. So that's what I'm thinking. And I think the last trade that I saw proposed for Dylan Cease was Jet Williams and Brandon Sproat. And in my opinion, that's a no way. That's a no-brainer. That is a non-starter. And now is actually the trade package for Garrett Crochet. For all of you who weren't familiar, that is what the Chicago White Sox wanted for Garrett Crochet. And he had 2 years left on his contract, wasn't making as much money. So the value that you would have had to give up for him was a lot higher. Dylan Cease, you shouldn't have to give up that much value for. Plus, the Padres, I would want to take advantage of that situation. And then if you go for Michael King, the value, the package should be less. But we will see what happens. I trust in David Stearns. Carlos Mendoza continues to say, trust in the process, trust in the team. And again, the Mets have yet to fail under David Stearns. Until they fail, until they go down a bad road, I'm going to continue to be positive, continue to be confident in the man that has, really given me reasons to be confident. So that's what I have here. Folks, let me know what your comments are. Drop the comment. How likely are we to get a frontline starter? How impressed are you that Steve Cohen put his money where his mouth is? I mean, literally put his money where his mouth is. Over $1 billion invested in this offseason. That was the most. Last year, the Dodgers did I think 1.2, 1.3, and everybody's like, oh my God, oh my God. I mean, the Mets almost matched that a year later. Almost a year later. So give the Mets a lot of credit for that. And, people calling the Mets cheap, you just can't do it. You can't do it. I can understand if the Mets had a $200 million payroll, but the Mets will do anything and everything. I mean, I would expect the Mets to make a trade if they need to make a trade. And when I say make a trade, I mean make a trade that includes possibly taking on extra salary. So the initial article that I was alluding to before about the Mets possibly dumping payroll and they wanted to do that with the Padres really didn't make sense to me. But that's why you go through these things, and then at the end of the day, you make kind of like a judgment, a call. But thank you, folks, for watching, returning. Again, like, subscribe. We're going to have a lot of fun in the future. I really appreciate you all, and have a great night, day, whenever you're watching this.